Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. So nice to see many familiar names, no faces yet. If you feel comfortable to show your face, we would love to see it. Otherwise, we understand that life is busy and we appreciate you tuning in from wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays, your weekly stop for a little bit of Bhakti wisdom made practical. So before we start, we would like to start with an icebreaker, as we normally do, to get our brains working in the right direction a little bit. So today the question is, what is one thing you do to take care of yourself, right? What is one way you practice self-care?
I was gonna say like sleep on time and wake up. I feel like a lot of times my friends have like different sleep schedules, but I feel like one thing I do to take care of myself is just kind of prioritize sleep, and it has like such a positive impact in my life.
Absolutely, sleeping on time.
Well, I think everybody saw a little bit of what I was doing. Whenever I have some spare time, I'll do Tai Chi. I've been doing Tai Chi for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years.
How many years, Graham?
8 or 9 years.
8 or 9 years. Wow.
I mean, I'm not, there to become a master or anything. It's just more for my own health maintenance.
Absolutely.
And yoga is also, I've done yoga. It's been a while, and I don't know, my joints have gotten really stiff. So some of the asanas can be really difficult for me. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
topsy turvy ones, I've had a tendency to avoid lately.
Yeah, Tai Chi is really interesting because it almost seems like a full body meditation, something that is able to engage many more senses and something that's able to calm you down, relax you, engage you in something that helps you connect. Yeah, I love
The
it.
music that you were playing, it just kind of it synced with what I was doing because it just it was a very pleasant experience.
Yes. Glad to hear that, Graham. Anybody else? What do you do to take care of yourself?
Hey, Haribo, Momodiji.
Yes.
I actually I do like to get out into nature. That really grounds me, kind of clears me up, and kind of gives me new energy. Um, that's one major thing for me that I try to do every day.
Absolutely. In a very practical sense, connecting with our roots by going outside.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to get out of the office, for example, which I have not done today.
I mean, I wouldn't mind your office. Those windows look pretty big and nice with a gorgeous view. So
It's true. It is a nice office.
Katie put in the chat, she likes to keep her living space uncluttered. It helps her feel less stressed. Yes, definitely. I kind of relate with that. Self-care for me sometimes is just cleaning up around myself and making my surroundings or trying to replicate what I want my mind to be through my surroundings.
Yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned nature. That was a reminder. That's a big one for me too. I'm out in West Seattle, and so going to Lincoln Park out here is I try and do that weekly just to reset. Um, and then yesterday too, notice was kind of uh, needed to reset, so I also did some yoga asana and pranayama meditation, which really helped me reground myself.
Yes, absolutely. I think going outside is something, at least for those who are in Seattle, sometimes we can take it for granted in the summers, unless you really like to go out in the rain. I'm not one of those people, but when the weather's nice, it's definitely a pleasant way to connect. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing. So today with us, we have Kula, who is a chaplain at Stanford University. And I always love having Kula with us because he is quite literally the embodiment or the definition of making spiritual knowledge practical, because that's his whole job. He helps students make spiritual knowledge practical and apply it in their day-to-day lives to lead more meaningful and intentional, lives. And in a school like Stanford University, where there's very talented individuals, but I'd also assume there's lots of peer pressure and stress. I can I can't imagine how much wisdom Kola has accumulated over the years, and we're very grateful that he takes time out of his schedule to come meet us at Wisdom Wednesdays and share a little droplet of that wisdom with our group. So Kola, thank you so much for joining us, and we are very, very excited to see what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Amoda. Very happy to be here again. I was I'd written to you before. I think that the last time I spoke, I had a presentation, and the whole time is on one slide, and I felt awful because I was like, oh my God, that was a very whatever generation, I think X or whatever millennial or whatever I am. I'm sorry. Thank you. I think I was too much in this like manya. I was just like talking. I must have missed it. I apologize, but thank you. I hope this time it will be different. But what I am talking about again is what I do as a chaplain, which is spiritual care. But I have been really working on it and trying to see it from the perspective of my religious tradition, which is Bhakti, a Bhakti tradition, and trying to see which elements of my religious tradition in the theology and in the practices that have been helpful in me being able to do this type of work. And that's something that I'm actually still actively working on, because at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, I have a presentation on that same topic for the North American Hindu Chaplaincy Association, which is the main kind of Indic Hindu chaplaincy association here. And yeah, so I'm going to present part of this to you. This isn't the whole thing, but these are certain aspects to it. But I present it to you also as let's say fellow theologians, maybe to help me understand things better. So at any point, if you feel like I have some thoughts on that, please feel free to raise your hand or put a note in or anything like that. Okay, so let me try sharing my screen here. Let's see, and I hope I share the right screen. Let's see. Okay, that's now. Do you see this screen, Karuna?
Yes, we see that screen.
Wait,
And
let me just try it. Well, let me move it. Let's see if it moves. Did you see it move?
yes, we see the next slide today.
Yes, I feel like I've already advanced from my last appearance. Um, it's like reincarnation, you have a different chance to do it differently. Samsara. So the title of this is Karuna, which means in Sanskrit means compassion. And I think compassion has been a very very interesting topic, especially for people to study. We have there's a research facility called CCARE here at Stanford, which researches compassion, specifically compassion, and how it helps humans psychologically and emotionally. But even though it's one of the topics I want to talk about, but there'll be another one that I think is the core aspect, I think, of care, as I'm saying, from the Bhakti perspective. Maybe more general or more essential than Karuna is the concept of rasa, which is relationship. And I think that is a very unique and essential thing from the tradition that is coming from Bengal, which is the tradition I come from, and from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the 16th century. So, but there's a very profound aspect of that relationship. But this is this part is mainly about compassion and some aspects of, well, how we relate ourselves to the world. So that's really the main, this is just kind of the, before getting into rasa, this was something I was thinking about. How do we see ourselves in relation to the world? And I'll start. So last time I spoke, this is a picture of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu it's not from the 16th century, but and his sangha, his close group of friends. So in some ways, to me, it epitomizes this kind of like relationship that we're speaking about, healthy relationship. So last time I spoke with you, I wanted to give at least a general definition of spiritual care. And now spiritual care is essentially what chaplains are trained in. This is what we do. We provide pastoral, what's been called pastoral care before, but it had very kind of Christian grounding. And within the past, I'd say 10 or 15 years, that's expanded, and that many people are asking for not just, pastoral Christian care, they're asking for care from different traditions like Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism. I think I would venture to say that this, is very much more universal, this kind of spirituality. And I definitely, with my colleagues, we connect on many things. But this is the definition I'll put here that actually me and my colleague had established for Stanford and on the website. And we have that spiritual care is a type of counseling that's provided by a trained care provider. That training is clinical pastoral care. And so you have to be educated in that. Usually they're in, healthcare settings. And it involves non-judgmental and compassionate listening that allows people to share their joys, concerns, and hopes in the context of their full humanity. And for many, it involves their spirituality and their philosophy. It has the goal of fostering a person's spiritual and existential well-being, and if desired, it can include guidance, prayer, meditation, spiritual reflection, and scriptural study. Spiritual care focuses on healing our relationship to self, to community, with nature, and with the divine, the unknown, or that which transcends the self. So I just put that here. This is the kind of the main statement that we had for that. And here I want to call the attention to healing our relationship. And that is, I think, a very important thing. I think it's actually, if I could speak for myself, I think in my own experience on a spiritual path, relationships seem to be at the core of many of our existential things. And whether it's a relationship with your friends and family, which is known, and of course we know that our relationships with friends and family could cause us a lot of distress, or it could cause us create a lot of happiness in our lives. And I can tell you, frankly, most of the people who I've ever spoken to, or students who come in here, it's 90% is always about relationship, whether it's boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, but also relationships with our families, our parents. We go through so many different changes. So it always seems to be relationship for me. And I think that that's something that I'd like to emphasize as I start presenting this, at least for a few places. So that's our definition there. Now I have another definition of compassion, which we'll see here. Compassion for the eternal soul is self-realization. So this idea that being able to, as the term Karuna, to care for not just the person, but the soul, that eternal part, that eternal aspect, the essential aspect of a person. And this is the rest of the quote from Bhaktivedanta Swami, and this is from the Bhagavad Gita, the 2.1, the commentary. But, he says, no one knows where compassion should be applied. Compassion for the dress of a drowning man is senseless. A man fallen in the ocean of nescience cannot be saved simply by rescuing his outward dress, the gross material body. Let me just take this. So I'm gonna switch back and forth if that's okay, because I know sometimes if you're just in the presentation, but so just to be clear, compassion for the dress of a drowning man is senseless. So the idea is that if you see someone drowning in the ocean and you try to grab them and you just pull out their clothes, it's sad because you weren't able to help the person, you just got their clothes. But this is what Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is trying to say, that as we start to help, if you want to care about people, you might want to consider what aspect are you trying to help. And that's why there's criticisms of like social support, social services, because we ask, well, are we helping? How are we helping? And some people would say, well, this is why it's always going to fail unless we could really make that kind of spiritual change and provide real spiritual care. And that, I think, is something that I've discussed many times with people. But I also am going to look at this in a few different ways, okay? So getting back here to... Okay. So this is the quote, and moving on here. Oops, let me move this here. So do we need spiritual care? And that's the slide you see, right? Just to make sure. I think that's been, if I could, be clear, like many times, whether here at Stanford or at the hospital, we always have to advocate for ourselves. And that means that we're also advocating for patients when we say that spiritual care is something that's needed. Because I think for a long time, people thought that it wasn't an aspect of overall health. But now things are changing. And so, as I mentioned last time, there is a different view now. People are looking at health as a multifaceted, multidimensional, and a multidisciplinary model. So as a chaplain, I work hand in hand here, even at Stanford. I work together with our mental health offices. We have our wellness, we have coaches. Yesterday I had a call from Stanford Hospital saying that there's a few patients that would like to speak with me. And so there's this idea that now it's becoming clear that just being able to take care of the body, and believe it or not, the mind, that there's still something missing that needs to be taken care of, and or needs care, and that's the spiritual. And so one way they tried to provide that is through chaplaincy. And so, as I say here, see chaplaincy in the Joint Commission. The Joint Commission is the institute or the institution that does all of these quality checks of hospitals. And one of the things that they require is that there is a chaplaincy or spiritual care in the hospital. So now it's become somewhat of a mandatory thing for certain levels of healthcare. So, but there's another view, is not that spiritual care is just one part of this large system of view of health, but that it is the core of what it is to be healthy. That if we don't take care of the soul, or if we don't take care of the spirit, or we don't take care of someone's spiritual life, then all things will not be nourished. So here it says, we may, however, understand the health of the body, mind, and soul holistically, where the soul is at the center requiring nourishment. And just as the soul maintains and governs the body, God also, in that sense, maintains and governs all. Now, that could be God, it could be divine, but it varies from person to person. But that is one of the views. That's the view that's shared by Prabhupada in the quote that we just went through. And then I want to share with you, these are few. Okay, so we'll come back to this quote. This is from the Bhagavatam. So this verse is something that I had read from Prabhupada for many years, but then some years ago I realized he wasn't just making an analogy; it was actually straight from the scripture, from Sastra. And we'll look at this verse a little later. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and the limbs of the body, simply worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods who are parts of that Supreme Personality. And by demigods, they mean, Prabhupada means here, like the gods, they're seen in this world where they're they're kind of like the maintenance people of the world. And so things like rain, sun, disasters, these natural things, people would worship like Indra or Varuna to make sure that certain things would be pacified. And so in that kind of paradigm of seeing things, this verse says, if you worship Krishna or God directly, you're watering, all of those things are taken care of. The supreme God, who is Krishna, or God, or many different names, God of many different names, or the divine of many different names. So that was something that I had known for some time. And I think I started thinking of it differently when I was at the hospital. And so I saw this idea of the tree. The tree, yeah, I remember I was talking about this for a while last time, and I had no idea that the tree, the whole thing wasn't there. But the tree, to nourish a tree, obviously look at all these different things that come in and are expressed or taken in by the tree, whether it's water, carbon monoxide, or carbon dioxide, and expressing oxygen and the energy of the sun. There are many things that nourish the tree. And so in this sense, I know this is probably, the resolution wasn't so good, but yes, the roots, we do nourish the roots. It is essential. And I think what Prabhupada says is that I think that we've forgotten that for too long, that maybe in medicine, especially in the idea of what is healthy, we had focused too much on all the different things, that we focused on treating like the drowning man. We focused on making sure that, the suit was tailored well, or that there were, the holes were stitched up, but that wasn't really helping. And so this is another view of that, a much better resolution. But there are different aspects that really nurture ourselves. Belonging is something I put there that's a major thing that Stanford seems to want to focus on. And that was a major thing coming out of the pandemic, where a lot of people forgot how to connect with people again and how to belong. We had been in kind of isolation for quite a while. So it was called the crisis of belonging and loneliness in America. Actually, I think the Surgeon General, like if you go on the government site, that there's a crisis of isolation and loneliness. And what that means is that it affects your health outcome. And of course, it includes depression, it can include, self-harm, but it was causing a lot of other problems in terms of like how we become healthy. Identity development is a part of that, who we are. Physical health, mental health, healthy relationships, and there at the root, we have our spiritual health and our spiritual practice. And I put that little floating in sun, say God there is the source of all of these things, as Prabhupada had said in that verse. I guess I would like to stop here, because this is something that I did have some thoughts. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that idea, that is it enough to just, does everybody feel the same? That if we have health in our spiritual practice, everything else should be fine. And I pose that not as like a simple question, because I think many people have a nuanced view of that. I guess I'd premise it by saying that I've heard a lot of things like what people call spiritual bypassing, where people would say, like, if you just do this prayer, or if you do these types of rituals, you'll be okay. And some people kind of looking at that and saying, "So that's not enough. You can't just say that you're gonna be okay. That if you have like a physical ailment, that it would just be that." Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Um, Strong or just wondering?
I
Anybody?
do.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Philomena. I'm actually a hospital social worker.
Mhm.
Just saw my favorite chaplain today. Big fan of the chaplains.
Yeah.
Um, I have to say I disagree that all you need is the spiritual practice and you'll be fine.
Mhm.
Because as you and I both know from working in the hospital setting, especially like when you are working with people that are very, very sick and or very impoverished,
Yeah.
that would come off as incredibly insensitive. I'm a big fan of Maslow's hierarchy of
Mm.
needs. And that, like, I think that spiritual practice can make a lot of distressing situations more bearable, but ultimately, like at the end of the day, people still need health care. People still need, clean water, food, and access to shelter.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Any other thoughts? It's okay to say, and don't feel squeak or maybe a little um, not confident to say, like, I do think that spirit
Um,
is enough.
Hi, I'm Katie.
Yeah.
I recently had an experience this year where I was in the hospital for quite, a decent amount of time. And one of the things that helped me a lot during my stay was spirituality. And I felt very while I was sick, especially while I was sick, I felt a really deep connection kind of to the universe and to um, spirituality. Uh, and it's interesting. I don't know where I'm necessarily going with this thought, but as I left the hospital, I've struggled kind of with, adjusting, etc. My spiritual practice I've felt more disconnected from spirituality. So I think there can sometimes be an interesting, like, inverse relationship with, like, where different parts of your health are at and where your spiritual practice or like connection lies. Because as my I guess like surroundings changed, my spiritual mindset kind of shifted a little bit away from that connectedness that I was feeling. And
Mm.
I've been pretty unhappy, but I'm also finding it hard while some of my health aspects are negative to feel that connectedness. So I think like at some point I was extremely keyed in because I was really sick.
Mm.
And then as I kind of moved away from being severely sick, I kind of drifted away. But the unhappiness kind of crept in as I felt less spiritually connected.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. It's yeah, and thank you. Well, I think I see it as Google Pixel 6, but but I thank you for both sharing those thoughts. And I saw some messages here. I completely agree. Let me just see. Yeah. Uh, so Dana, you also completely agree. Um, the I wanted to pose that question. I mean, it is a question that I know that we oftentimes, as chaplains, there were times that we were right in the middle of um, those those kind of those opinions. There would be some people who would be kept on life support, and the family thought that, you know, they need to be maintained because of their faith, that they cannot cut the life support. And those are things that even all we could do is really speak with them and give them an analysis and say, you know, the body is no longer functioning. It could no longer sustain itself without this. And you may just have to allow the process to naturally take place, which is hard. And it's part of in the hospital, it's quite a difficult thing, as I think anybody here, one person at least is, I know, social worker. These are things that we have to deal with care. And it's hard sometimes. And sometimes faith can be just very, very strong, and just not, somebody's faith will just not listen. They will not let go. And it could be mixed with different things. But yeah, I wanted to just pose that question because I think it's important to kind of know where you might stand on something like this, as you, not just as you may say, maybe make a health decision for yourself in the future, or if it's you're making or trying to help a person make a decision, or somebody's asking you for advice, realizing that there is this, there's a balance that should be struck. But I want to also, so as I examine, this isn't just the end of the conversation. We're going to examine this a little bit more, because for many years, I became a devotee, as I just realized it's 30 years ago. A long time. But I remember this was one of the first analogies that I was told, and that it really inspired me, and it's what kind of inspired me to move into the temple at the time. And this idea that what you need is spiritual, and that is going to nourish you. That's why you haven't been satisfied with whether you're getting into this school or that school, or going to this party, or dating this person, or those things won't satisfy you. You've tried, you've seen they've come to an end, and you haven't nourished yourself at the roots. And that inspired me. And as I came into, as I got older and eventually became a chaplain, and in the hospital, I saw that model, it just wasn't working. And I had to ask myself, well, I don't want to, downgrade the value of spirituality. I don't want to relativize it. How can I make this all work? And being a chaplain, I think we, just like a doctor who's a cardiologist will come in and say, like, I know how the heart's going to work, and this is how I'm going to take care of the heart. I was okay with the idea that I'm a chaplain. That's spiritual stuff. This is our area. So we'll help focus, nourish the spiritual things, nourish the root of the tree. That gave me solace. But I also would see it also in the temple. Sometimes I think people would feel that, I would hear it where somebody would say, well, if you're not feeling well, or if you're feeling depressed, you should just chant. And while I fully believe the power of the holy name, I do think it can create many things. It can connect us. And this is essentially the idea of chaplaincy that I've been talking about, that relationship is the core of it. But there are other things that need to also be worked on, because it could be based on a relationship with the people in your life. It could be a relationship with yourself. It could be a relationship with many elements in life that are causing you distress. And while it's good to talk about and say, you could continue this japa and this harinam, but I will also be here and say, like, but how is your relationship with your mother? Or are you having trouble in your marriage, or are you feeling depression for some reason? That shouldn't be neglected. You can have them both. It's just not, I think I'd always say, like, at least we should follow up with that person. We shouldn't just let them walk out the door. Okay, so let me move on. Share this. If anybody has anything to add to that, please feel free to also. So here I was. This should be it. And so this was the verse. This is the actual verse. Yatataror mula nise chanena tripyanti tat skanda bujo pashkaha prano paharach chayatendriyanam tathaiva sarvarhanam achuteja. Achutyeja. So this is the translation here. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and limbs of the body, simply worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods who are parts of that Supreme Personality. But so for many years, that worked. But when it wasn't, I started to inquire and started to investigate. And then I saw, just some years ago, I just read this verse, and then I saw the context in which it belongs. And I think that might be helpful also in understanding this concept. The following verse says, in translation, during the rainy season, water is generated from the sun, and in due course of time during the summer season, the very same water is again absorbed by the sun. Similarly, all living entities, moving and inert, are generated from the earth. And again, after some time, they all return to the earth as dust. Similarly, everything emanates from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in due course of time, everything enters into him again. Then it starts to build up. Just as the sunshine is non-different from the sun, the cosmic manifestation is also non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality is therefore all-pervasive within this material creation. When the senses are active, they appear to be part and parcel of the body, but when the body is asleep, their activities are unmanifest. Similarly, the whole cosmic creation appears different and yet non-different from the Supreme Person. So the world is also connected, unified with God. My dear King, sometimes in the sky there are clouds, and sometimes there's darkness. Sometimes there's illumination. The appearance of all these things take place consecutively. Similarly, in the Supreme Absolute, the modes of passion, darkness, and goodness appear as consecutive energies. Sometimes they appear and sometimes they disappear. That means a lot of the things that happen in the world, the good things, the bad things, the passionate things, the ignorant things. Because the Supreme Lord is the cause of all causes, he is the super soul of all individual living entities, and he exists as both the remote and immediate cause. Since he is aloof from the material emanations, he is free from their interactions and is Lord of material nature. You should therefore engage in his devotional service, thinking yourself qualitatively one with him. So in many ways, this connection that we make, the compassion, the care that we give to others, it's not just separate. It's not, we are connected. And I think that in many ways, it's wrong to just think it's one thing, that we're all just unified. We're also quite different. And that's also, I think, the one thing that we have to be very clear about, that distinction is very important to also include in this definition. But this is the verse that this qualifies the verse to say that all of the universe is connected. It's not simply that you're spiritually nurturing yourself, but it comes in many different ways. So by showing mercy to all living entities, being satisfied somehow or other, which is somehow or other being satisfied, and restricting the senses from sense enjoyment, one can very quickly satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Janardana, which is just another name for Krishna, or God, another name of God. The idea here, I think, you go from one conception that there is going to be one way to nurture a relationship, but all living entities are connected to God. So in one sense, is while you can say nurturing the relationship with God is going to nourish you and nourish God, but also if you treat others with that love and other aspects of yourself. If you can see it in that way, you're also nurturing yourself. You're also nurturing God. So in the same way, let's see, is it this verse here? Let me just go back here. Where was this verse? Excuse me. So the idea isn't just that we water the tree from the roots, that also if you water the tree from all of its aspects, it's similarly nourishing the tree, just in the same way that we are connected. Oh, that's where I had it. Just as in the same way here, I had written, we understand the health of the body, mind, and soul holistically, where the soul is the center requiring nourishment. And just as the soul maintains and governs the body, God maintains and governs all. And so, but if you also nourish the body with that understanding, you would also nourish the soul. So when you look at the tree and you are taking care of these things like physical health, mental health, healthy relationships, you are nourishing the soul in different ways. It might not be you couldn't say that it's going to replace spirituality, but it needs to be nourished as well. In the same way that in many ways that we see things, living entities, that if we give them the respect, if we give that compassion, if we give compassion to all other living beings, as that final verse had said, it also is a reflection of the worship of God. But I think that that's something that had been said by another tradition, that if we worship man, then we worship God. It's not just as that. We have to also worship God, because it's also incomplete if you just say, I'm worshiping man, and that's worshiping God, or that's worshiping the divine. Because there's also that relationship to the divine, because that is a relationship as well. So that, and that divine has its own personality, has its own set of connections and characteristics. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Let me just move back here. Stop sharing. Any thoughts? So the idea is that, yes, you can nourish, think of the soul, the person is being nourished by these other aspects, whether it's the branches and the leaves, they have to be taken care of also. And yes, there also has to be nourishing of the roots. In a similar way, so that's health, that's our individual. In a similar way, many of the aspects of the world, like if you see God in nature, that is, you can see God in nature, and that could nourish you, and that could nourish nature, but that could also nourish God in that way. But you should not neglect that direct relationship with God. So it's both. It's not one or the other. It's not just the roots. It's also the leaves. It's also the sun. It's also the bark. We have to take care of all of those things.
Yeah, I really love that point. And one example that I've heard that's kind of helped me with this concept is like they said, like imagine you have like a cage and there's a bird in the cage. And you want to take care of that cage. So let's say, or of that bird. So every day you just keep cleaning the cage, just keep cleaning, and you don't feed the bird. And after some time, you look, oh, the cage is so clean, but the bird inside is dead. And it's an example to kind of show that the bird is kind of our soul, and the cage is our body, physical, mental health, and all the parts of the like the branches that you showed. So that really helps me because you can't ignore the soul or the bird inside. So you have to keep feeding that, and one means of that is spirituality. and just kind of understanding who we are, what our purpose is. So that is important to feed the bird. But then at the same time, we also need to clean the cage, and kind of take care of our physical, mental health. And so just wanted to share that with the group.
Thank you, Vanya. That was good. Very good. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? So let me share this here. Going back here. And this was something that I had developed when I was at the Bhakti Center, this idea that self-care and then relational care and then community care are constantly interacting with one another. And so for self-care, I put the term svadhyaya, which comes from yoga, which means self-examination. So dhyaya. And then for relational care, I use the term sangha. And for community care, I thought the term could be sankirtana. In some ways, those are the things that would be kind of indications of how we could take care of ourselves. That's something that I did examine more towards when I was at the Bhakti Center. But this is kind of the model that I've been working with recently. Ultimately, all of this is our connection to the divine. But I think in terms of, let's say, some in our tradition would say, well, also you could see the divine in seeing when you have the relation with his servants, with his devotees. So this was in some ways, as I was presenting it to the community, I said, these are maybe 3 aspects that we should always be checking, making sure that we're taking care, like we have self-care, and we're making sure that our relationships with one another, the people in our lives, are healthy, and working on them, and not just like, simply saying, oh, you may have to say, like, I can't be, I need space from this person, or maybe there's a toxic relationship. But in general, we're always trying to examine our relationships, which is something I'll show a little bit later also. And then community care has more to do with the society, a larger aspect of relational care. And that's something I want to focus on a little later. What time do we have? We have till 7?
Yes.
Okay, let me just get through this. So here I have 2 things. Ask yourself, in this context of this cycle, how are you nourishing these areas of care for yourself and for others? And that could include like the world and in nature. And then think about your community, whether it's your family or if you're in a temple community. Does your temple provide spaces, practices, or education to nurture these aspects of care? And if there is any gap, there's how can you find a way to fill the gaps with gold? That's a quote, which was in a song my wife sang, but it's also that she told me that she got that from Vaisheshika Prabhu. She heard him say that in a lecture, that when you find those gaps, you can turn these gaps, these missing parts, into places of growth, and you fill the gaps with gold. So, I mean, are these things that I could ask that now, or we could just move on? But this is a structure that I am continuing to work on, but really, especially within communities, seeing if there are places that nourish and scaffold this type of care. If it's self-care, like not just like, are you taking care of yourself physically well, but are you taking care of yourself mentally well? Are you having, whether it's meditative practices or exercise, are you taking care of yourself? Whether it's your idea of finances, are you taking care of yourself? All of these things. And relational care, how many communities, whether religious or secular, do you have support for? Like, are you having, do you have marital counseling? Do you have Do you have like friendship counseling? Do you have, what kind of social groups, social connections can you make? And what's the right way to make connections? And then community is a big thing. What are the values of our community, and what are the values that we express? Do you guys, I'll just leave a question. Do you guys feel that you have these things in your communities? As a quick question. Or families. Support for these aspects of care.
I was gonna say yes, but in different degrees.
Mhm.
Maybe it's not like an ultimate care, but like for example, education, if I think about it in like college, I get a lot of education, but there's also this aspect of spiritual education, kind of like who am I? Like what is my purpose? So it's like, okay, maybe it's a little incomplete in some cases. So maybe I get from different parts of different communities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that. Do you find a lot of support in your family for these things?
Yeah.
Yeah, it
There are
seems quite
definitely-
natural, right? Like a lot of times, like it's hard to say, like, yeah, I get relational care because
Yeah.
my sister keeps on, busting my chops, but you got to grow. You got to grow with it. You have to learn from it.
Yeah, yeah.
I see a question here. How does modern psychology or mental health professionals see spiritual care? If I go to a doctor, say I'm depressed, I'll be given medicine and would be recommended to go see a therapist, but probably not seeking spiritual care. Yeah, that's a very common thing. And I think that's why, in many ways, that both of these ideas, the idea that when I said, when we had that question in the beginning, about the nurturing the roots and asking, do you think that it's helpful to make sure that the rest of the aspects of your health or your tree should be taken care of? But you have to be able to make that distinction and say, like, well, I'm going to go speak to a doctor and say that I'm I might be depressed. And they could talk about that, but realize that they may be able to talk about that, but will they be able to be your spirit, give you the spiritual nourishment that you need? Because that may come from another source, a greater source, a deeper source of inspiration. The biopsychological spiritual approach addresses some of this. Yeah. It depends also, like if you feel like there's a core aspect of yourself that is mainly spiritual, like this is like your focus, this is the thing that is, your nourishment. You may find that in your personal practice or in your personal life, and then you speak to a therapist about these experiences of depression, but you may also have a separate place where you find that spiritual nourishment. And it's a balance, but it's also the essential. If it is that spiritual life is the main thing in your life, that you've determined that, it's also important to keep it to be able to nourish that in a way that's successful for you. Yes.
I have thoughts on this.
What's that?
So kind of like what I said, the biopsychosocial spiritual approach is a really good way, like as a mental health clinician, to assess like what people need. But also as a mental health clinician, generally speaking, unless you are a clinician with some kind of like you are approaching it like from a religious perspective, it's not necessarily the lane that you are going to that it's not really your lane per
Mhm.
se. It's a good thing to address like during assessments in terms of like is spirituality approach important to you, and how do you meet that need? And it's a good thing to talk about in terms of like supporting people to find a way to meet that need, but doesn't necessarily meet that need itself. It's kind of like something that we've been talking about at the hospital, because they slashed our budget a year or two ago, and they really cut back on the chaplains and the chaplain hours. And they're like, "Oh, call social work," and we're like, we're not the chaplains though.
Right.
Like we don't do the same things. There's a chunk in the middle of the Venn diagram, but we're also not chaplains, and we're not going to try and take on that role because that's not appropriate.
Right. Right. It is, that's why for the question, yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And it's always helpful if you have a network of people, especially if they're, you know, they don't have to be connected. But I know at Stanford we make references to each other. We say, well, if we see somebody, we say, I would say you should speak to one of the therapists, or you should go, you could go speak to one of our social workers. They could help you with this or that. Being able to know that not just that you're in your area, but that you're part of a team, and that's what, contributing to the whole holistic idea of the individual's health. And you have a question?
Yeah, question, like more of a reflection maybe. So there was an analogy I heard recently, and it goes something like this. I love analogies. So, the analogy says, imagine that there's a pot on top of a fire. The fire can be compared to spiritual practice, whereas the chopped vegetables can be considered just to your daily activity or daily lives. And if you swing one way or the other, either you'll be left with a really hot pot with no vegetables inside of it, or a pot full of vegetables with a candle underneath, which just doesn't cook. And I was thinking about how no matter who a person is, no matter to what degree of spirituality you believe in or even religiosity, everybody puts faith into something. Some people believe in this concept of like manifestation, for example, or even vision boarding to an extent, I think falls into the realm of spirituality, even though it may not be traditional spirituality. Um, so I was just thinking about this analogy recently and how at the end of the day, spiritual a spiritual perspective is something that people end up needing in their lives just in various ways, um, and various degrees to find that balance to cook the pot.
That's good. Thank you. I think one thing I noticed is in the different areas, for example, like in the hospital, it's very easy for, like, we work as a team. And I was actually very happy that we could work well with social work and mental health and the doctors. But that's in the context of the hospital. Until a person came to me and said, my faith is very strong. I need you to be here. I need you to give me that nourishment. For the most part, we're part of a whole, collective sense of health. In the temple, it was everybody was the spiritual care. Everybody did spiritual care. And then but there wouldn't be a balance of like, well, we need to also make sure there's a doctor for this, or somebody needs to speak to a therapist. So every context has a very different kind of set of needs now. But I agree with you that this terms of the fire, only also because, and maybe it's because of, maybe everyone here also shares that idea that if we're, say, on a call about spiritual matters or wisdom, that spirituality is a very, very essential part of our goals in life, the things that is most important, not to relativize it. The problem is that there's a lot of people, not problem, but there are many people I've met in the hospital or even here at Stanford where they really do compartmentalize that spirituality. And and especially in the hospital where a lot of people didn't realize, like, they had gone through all of these things in life. Now they're sick and they had forgotten this whole part, and maybe time is short. And so a lot of times people call a chaplain for something like that. But that is something that in our spiritual sangha, in a spiritual community, we speak very freely about. Like, yes, this is the goal of life, that we are ready for. This is the essence of all meaning in existence. That we have to make sure that we are nourished. All of us need to be nourished by that. But that's a paradigm that I have. But I know there's a lot of people who have different paradigms than that. And as a chaplain, my role has been to kind of like tweak that and say like, well, how important is it to you? And if it is really important, then I can help you. But if you feel other things are more important, um, like your work, I might say like, okay, well, if going back to work is going to make you happy, even though I think it's hurting you, I think you might want to nourish yourself by considering things outside of that. But I can't tell them, they won't understand that until they come to that point of. So I'm just saying that there are different kinds. So like when we were at the Bhakti Center, everybody was the spiritual care specialist because it's the Bhakti Center. So everybody would give that, and I was like, we need to also try to find out who among us are like trained in therapy, who among us is trained in if somebody needs like financial advice, and who among us is trained in like has a background they actually do these things also. But I agree with you, Amoda. Like I also feel the same. Like I know myself would not be nourished if I didn't have spiritual life. Um, but there are different opinions about that, unfortunately. um, but I'm over time, unfortunately. I did I don't know if I should get into the next topic, or should I mean we could end on this concept here, but I did want to speak about something called moral injury, which has to do with community, the idea of community care. And I actually didn't find out what that was until coming here. And it seems to be a field that's growing, but it's a very interesting idea. But maybe that's something for another time.
Perhaps for a part 3. Yes, whenever we have you back. Well, thank you so much, Kula, for taking time out of your day to come speak with us, share some wisdom, share a perspective on the intersection of spirituality with modern day life. I think it's really refreshing to hear different perspectives from people around the world. And it's always great to have discussion, to hear from other people, because it is discussion that brings about constructive realization and understanding. So I love that people participate, and I'm grateful that all of you had a chance to join. Real quick, so for those of you who are in Seattle, we have on the 29th, we are having a grand opening celebration for a new space called not Bhakti Center, but Bhakti Studio. It's located near Gasworks Park. And on the 29th, we have like a half day wellness retreat. We're going to have art workshops. We're going to have like a gong sound journey. And we'll end with like kirtan, dinner, and there'll also be like prizes, food, other fun activities throughout the day. So if you would like, please do stop by. You can find you can find details on our Eventbrite. Thank you so much, everybody, and hope to see you all next Wednesday or maybe in person sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Moda.